you're going to be always met in probably in anything to do with the outdoors,
Right.
you know, shooting especially, but definitely in aviation. Yeah, if you're looking for an excuse, you'll find one. Well, yeah, I mean, I crashed and died, but he said my airplane was okay. And
Right. I feel better
okay,
about myself.
yeah, but at least he
You
told me
shouldn't.
so. It wasn't my fault because, well, you're right. It wasn't your fault, but you're still
Right.
dead,
Right.
or you're still stuck, or you know, you
Right.
still lost an airplane.
Right.
So
Right.
pat yourself on the back.
Right.
It wasn't your fault, but you could have stopped it.
Right. Right.
And that's what I love about being in the wilderness is just that, man, it's all on you.
I mean, when you think, you know, how do you quantify? You can't, but commercial airlines, outfitters, TSA lines, so many things out of your control. What do you think about when you?
Well, that's the only way I've ever done it.
Right.
So it was just very weird.
Right.
Especially when you've thought about it so much. Like,
Right.
why couldn't you do this? You know, I mean, why don't other people do this? I mean, I just don't see, I'm going to do it.
Right.
And then maybe I'll realize why other people don't do it.
Right.
And so you do it. And then you're just like,
Right.
that was the coolest thing I think I've ever done. Yeah, you know, let's go on a caribou hunt. Just taking off, you know, from your home, you know, not even an airport.
Right.
I mean, it's kind of like the way you would in a car.
Yep.
I mean, there's just not, okay, I'll do this and I'll do this. It's like you just load up all your stuff the
Load
night
up the
before.
plane and take off.
You wake up, you know, go to the bathroom, get your coffee, you show up,
Right.
climb in the plane, and you take off. And somewhere around mid-morning, you're landing in, you know, Salt Lake, Utah.
Right.
And you know, you're 25% of the way to Alaska. And then,
Right.
you know, you later on that evening, you land in Northwest Washington. And, you know, you can eat in the cockpit or you can
Right.
land and eat at a restaurant like I think we did in Washington.
Uh-huh.
But then to just go straight to it, you know, I mean, right to the wilderness, and there's no airport. There's no,
Right.
well, we'll, you know, stop and get this, you know. So there just wasn't any of that. It was just wherever you want to go. I mean, you got all of Alaska. So it was very weird, especially when you wake up the next day and, you know, 3 or 4 hours later, you're in Alaska and it's like, there it is. You can go that way. You want to go find salmon in islands? You want to go that way?
Right.
You want to go that way? And there was just such, I mean, down here, there's all kinds of stuff you can't do, but up there, it's just like, okay, we can't go over there. You know, that's a national park. Can't, you know, do this. And that's like 2%
Right.
of the geographic area that's in front of you.
Right.
And you have the entire Pacific coast, and if you want to keep going, then you can go way up into Alaska, but it was it's still weird when I think about it. It was almost like,
Right.
you know, like a dream, and I think it was partly just because I thought about it so much.
Right.
And then you go and you do it, and you know, when like the bad weather, and you see like a weather show, it's like, well, we're just going to go around that, and it was just
Right.
so simple, you know. But then when you look at a map, underneath that weather cell is 30 miles of wonderful fishing country wilderness, and it stays there for 2 days. You know, the weather doesn't move fast up there; it just kind of comes in and
On
hangs.
the coast, certainly. it
Yeah,
doesn't.
and
Right.
sits there. And so you're like, man, I'm glad we weren't there. And we could have been
Right.
if the weather had been better. But then you look at, you know, everything from ADSB to, you know, especially the Garmin InReach, and you're just like, yeah, we're just going to keep going. And just to have that level of flexibility.
Right. And that's
And
the real key. I'm reminded of it frequently because I'm always getting emails from outfitters. Oh, we just had somebody drop off. You could get into this hunt, or you could go on this hunt and it'll be 2 years from Wednesday. And you're going, 2 years from Wednesday? Really? I mean, it's, you know, it's hard to get excited about that. But
Yeah.
having the
Yeah.
aircraft.
it's probably
To
as
give you the
close as you'll get nowadays to a little bit of what it must have felt like, you know, to come into the Rockies or the
Right.
American West back in the 1800s,
Jim
where it's just
Bridger
like,
and all that good stuff.
so do I want to go up there? You know, do I want to hunt grizzlies in New Mexico, or,
Right.
you know, or maybe I'll go to Montana. you know, or maybe I'll do the gold thing. It's just like wherever you want.
Right.
I mean, just
The
there
world's
it
your
is.
oyster.
And yeah, and I mean, if you're that type of guy, that's an incredible feeling, and
Right.
you don't get to feel that way anymore. I mean, most people don't give a
Right.
crap about the wilderness
Right.
and be scared. They'd be terrified to even be in it.
Right.
And they'd probably be standing up, you know, on their sofas yelling, and you shouldn't be doing it either. You could die.
Right.
But yeah, if you like that type of stuff, that is a very strange feeling. That's the first thing my brother said to me, you know, is that's probably as close as you'll get to being in the, even though it's kind of the antithesis. I mean, you're in state-of-the-art technology, literally flying through the air
Right.
to access it. But that feeling, I was like, yeah, that's what I thought of the whole time. This is probably as close as you'll get, you know, because there are places, I mean, that is so massive that you can get there, and probably especially where we, you know, shot that caribou, and there is a really strong chance that in that little piece of the country, you're the only guy that's been there in 100 years. You could be, nowadays,
Right.
the only guy that's been there,
Right.
you know, since some Inuit, you know, came through it 500 years ago.
Right.
Unless someone happened to, but there's no reason a lot of times, I mean, once you get up into the far north, for someone to even be there. So it's just,
It really isn't.
yeah, and
I mean, great place to
and then
die.
if they needed, yeah, and how would they get there? You know,
Right.
there's, you know, if you're
plane
natives
or plane.
yeah, and in
or
the
plane.
1800s, men didn't go there because you just physically couldn't do
Right.
it. I
By
mean,
foot.
Colonel Green, you know, died proving. I mean, it was right up there north where we were, where that whole mess went down, and
Right.
you know, 97% of the men died
Right.
because you know there's just nothing there, and unless you're really good at hunting, and I would not be good enough for that country
Right.
because I don't know it good enough, because the game is pretty, you know, I mean, we just saw tons of it, but if
Yeah.
the caribou aren't moving through,
Right.
go find a moose in that country. Well, you'll
Right.
probably find them when you don't need one, but when you need one, they just ain't there.
Right.
And, you know, we've all read those old books. So just the ability to go into country like that and then leave
Right. I mean,
or go somewhere else.
to
It
really
was-
think about
that,
you know.
I guess I'll just say that's probably the most addictive
Right.
thing and feeling I think I've ever done.
Right. Right. Yeah, it is.
was
I mean, it
truly-
is the flexibility. There's a whole so many different stratas. There's time. There's money.
Yeah.
But flexibility,
Oh, yeah.
so that you are in control with that aircraft, and you need an aircraft, and you could just, like you say, see out there. How would we possibly have gotten here any other way? Well, you wouldn't. And it is with an aircraft, because you ain't gonna walk here, and you're not gonna make it back.
And it definitely adds to the fishing experience when you are fishing someplace that remote. And I know a lot of guys, you know,
Right.
get to different places, you know, and especially in the ocean and stuff. But
Right.
when you're just like, could be, if I'm not the only one that's fished right here, but you can name them on one hand in
Right.
history. There's not a lot of places in the world you can say that,
Right.
you know.
Absolutely.
And so when you're, you know, if you're the type of guy I am, it's, you know, when you're a little boy, you just always think about, man, one day I'm going to do that.
Right.
I'm going to grow up and I'm going to go be a mountain man. Well, you can't be a mountain man now, you know.
Right.
It's, shoot, it's not even legal.
Right.
But just that kind of remoteness when you're fishing there, and then you take all of what you do at your best and take all of what you think you know, and then you're just catching fish like you imagined you would, hand over fist.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty addictive feeling.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean,
now
it's
that was fun to watch, to
pretty-
see, you know, you take skills and experience, but now you're in a completely remote part of the world that you're unfamiliar with, other than seeing some satellite imagery and you know, and then to be able to
Yeah, and that's
turn it
really
into catching
deceptive,
fish.
both from a plane and satellites. It looks really, you know, it's just a map.
Right.
So you know what the stuff means, and
Right.
and it registers with your brain. But when you're on the ground, it's very easy,
Right.
especially when you're in the air, because you can see and you're just like, well, yeah, if there's nothing there, I guess we'll go over there. Mine could just walk. Then you measure it out on a map, and you're like, okay, so we'd be
Maybe
there in a couple of weeks. We'd get there. I guess we won't be walking.
Right.
I mean, wow.
when you
And
need
the
that
plane,
aircraft.
yeah, a plane just makes it so small. So you kind of got to be careful,
Right.
because I think very easily you could, you're just like, well, I'll just go over there, and if anything happens, we'll just walk out.
Right.
There's some places you won't.
Right.
I mean, because it's 5 minutes. Maybe it could be 30 seconds when you're flying down a mountain range, and you're deciding, okay, I'm going to find some lakes, we'll follow, and then we'll fly down maybe to where the ocean or whatever. But you're flying across wilderness, and you're looking for an area that you'd like to hunt or fish.
Right.
In 30 seconds, you can point that airplane on this side or this side of the range. And in reality, I mean, you just got to use your good outdoor sense to know. Look at those mountains.
Right.
You are not walking over those mountains.
Right.
I mean, like a lot of those ones you flew through.
Not to
I
be
mean, it
traversed.
is 500, 1,000 foot.
Right.
I mean, some of them were 2,000 foot vertical sheer ice cliffs. They ain't like the Rockies we got down here. There's a lot of them you can't get over, but there's not many down here you can't get over,
Right.
especially with a little bit of gear. You're not hiking over that thing. And so in 30 seconds, you're like, well, I'll go this way. And so that even dictates where you fly a little bit, because you're just like, well, in case something happened,
Right.
you've already decided, I'm going this way. I'm going this way. I'm not going that way. So, don't fly over here, because in 30 seconds, you can point that aircraft and fly for 5 minutes. And that 5 minutes could take you 2 weeks
Yep.
if you ever get out of it, because you're in the wilderness.
Right.
And which is an amazing feeling to me. But then you navigate all that and you get down, in a place you've never seen before, and it was more beautiful than you'd think it would be.
Absolutely.
I mean, and then you just, it's almost like being on a stage, and you're like, well, this is it, and I wonder if I remember how to fly fish. I mean, you start to,
Right.
because I don't know. It's hard to describe. It was for me, and most people wouldn't care, and they may even think it's silly, but that was,
Right.
A lot of guys. Now I'm grateful for the time I was born in, but every guy
Right.
like me, he's like,
thought
boy,
about
was
it.
I born in the
100
wrong
years.
century. Yeah, even old King
200.
Richard thought he was born,
Right.
too late. He wanted to be in the golden age of knights, which now we look back and like you were, but to him, no, he'd missed that first crusade. That's when he wanted to live, so I'm going to make another one. I mean, every guy wants to live.
Right.
Thinks he was born after his time, I guess, but so that's probably as close as I've ever got to going back in time.
Yep. Yeah. No, it's-
Just that there's no one, nobody's going to come get you, and the only way you're getting out of here is by your wits.
Right.
And and then to just be able to enjoy that land, the land. And maybe it was like that in the Old West, where I mean,
Right.
you throw a styrofoam cup in the water and they'll bite it. I
Right.
mean, they're just
Right. Right. Well, now it's obviously so privatized and fenced off.
oh yeah,
You
yeah,
couldn't
down
if
here.
you wanted to. I mean, there's parks and there's BLM land and stuff like that. But the thinking of the things you've always heard, where are there salmon?
Yeah.
Where, there's got to be a lake up there someplace. There's got to be, there's got to be confluences of streams. Well, Shazam, that works. It doesn't matter whether I've been here or not.
Yeah.
And I've had that experience, other places.
Yeah,
You're doing
hunting.
some kind of hunting.
Hunting's hunting and
Hunting's hunting.
fishing is
Fishing's
fishing.
It is.
Yeah.
It is. But without that
Yeah.
aircraft giving you
Yeah.
the flexibility
The-
you're just not going to be able to experience it.
The thing unique on sockeye, though, to me, And I would love to be able to do it for 3 or 4 days straight and get really, really good at it. I've never done it more than really 2 or 3 days at a time. And that is just flossing them. And so you've got to take the line, because they will not bite anything. So you've got to lay that line through their teeth. And then, because by law, they have to be hooked in the mouth. And then you have to use a certain size hook.
Right.
And all this stuff. Because snagging salmon is illegal. Right. You know, with some exceptions. The natives can do it, and out in the ocean you can do it, but in streams, salmon snagging is illegal. So if you catch them by any other part of their body, they have to be released, you know, which we did a couple of times, but it's kind of rare. Their body's not real prone to get caught on a hook anyways. So you have to lay the line through their mouth, set the hook, and drive it into the side of their mouth. And so if you think about it, it's like, man, how do you do that? What's surprising is, especially if you can see them and you balance your weight, and it's all about how fast your rod, for me, you know, I use a fly rod, how fast it moves through the water. And I'm sure the guys up there that, you know, live up there can just do it hand over fist. But if you got them stacked in there like we found,
Right.
you know, and we found them in 3 or 4 places like that, where you know, when you see them stacked in there like that, you can just about get one every cast. And then the funny thing is, when you get through that whole pod of salmon and you don't have one, and you're going to get a rainbow.
Right.
Almost every single time that thing straightens out.
Right.
I don't know how many rainbow trout.
Right.
And then you're just like, oh, well, that's a small salmon. No, that's a trout.
Right.
I mean, it's just, you could have eaten plenty good.
And we did.
Oh, yeah.
And, you know, it's just funny to, you know, when we went and visited your friend, you know, just the hierarchy, you know, that when they knew we had sockeye salmon.
Yeah, that's a big thing to them up there.
Right.
Like,
it's like
yeah,
ding,
and
ding,
I'll,
ding.
I'll just say, yeah, the guys up there that I've fished with, you catch what they call a chum, or you catch a pink, and they're like, oh, no, throw that thing back, you can't eat it.
Right.
I was
Of course you
even
can eat
one
it.
time with a guy, and he was like, well, and I asked him, I said, why do they say you can't eat those pink salmon? They sell them in the store all the
No
time.
kidding.
I mean, I knew
They're
that.
in the
I'm not
cans.
an idiot. And I've had them, and they're delicious.
Right.
They're wonderful. And I'm like, why do they say up here, you know, that you can't eat the pink salmon? And he's like, oh, you can't. I mean, that's a fact. And this guy's not, he fishes, but he wasn't really
They're
maybe.
salmon snobs.
Well, yeah, and I see why they are, because then when you try it,
If you
you're
get
like,
the sockeye.
yeah, but I'm still from Texas. I'll take them all. But yeah, they are better. The sockeye is probably, yeah.
Right.
I see why they say that.
Yep.
And but even up there, you know, the Copper River Reds, the sockeye, those are considered the finest on earth, you know. And there's people that debate that. Who cares? Well, up there, and I've had them all, cannot taste the difference. But if you're an Alaskan, they'll tell you, no, I won't eat a sockeye unless it was caught in the Copper River. I mean, there's even river snobs about it. And to me, they're all good. But I asked this guy, why can't you eat a pink? And he goes, oh, you can't. Well, I think they're poisonous or something. And he's
They're
like,
so
you know,
poisonous
yeah,
that
and then the
they
dogfish,
sell 'em.
you know, they call them a dogfish. Well, it's just a chum salmon, and they use them for dog food. Yeah, you can't eat them either. I think they're poisonous also, which is totally ludicrous, you know. Back in the 80s,
Right.
that's what you're buying in the store.
No question.
In a can. So,
Right.
and I think they're good.
And
I
they talked
definitely see
about-
the difference.
They don't send their best stuff down to the lower 48 in general.
Yeah.
Maybe a few top line restaurants, but
Yeah.
they're paying for it.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah, it was fun
especially
to
on
watch
the
them.
sockeye. So when, you know, I was like, hey, you know, I got some salmon. Well,
I know.
what do you got?
I saw that.
Well, there's really.
Right.
You got some sockeye? Well, hey, son.
Let's have a dinner tonight.
Fire up the grill. He actually got some sockeye. Where'd you get the sockeye? And you tell, oh yeah, they're running down there. Yeah, they're not up here yet. Well, shoot, yeah, I'll eat a sockeye.
Right.
I love those
Yeah, you
things.
changed the dynamic of the
But
dinner,
you could
that's
tell,
for sure.
you know, it's just like, huh. So I guess there's some. Yeah, it's just funny up there, and they're that way about trout. That's the way my buddy Mike kind of explained it to me. He was like, because I mean, I was just into it, and we've gotten to go fishing together, you know. up in Idaho. He lives on Lake Pend Oreille, just an incredible fisherman. But I'm a trout guy, and he could care less because he's from Alaska and he's all into bass. And I'm like, screw the sunfish, man. I mean, I want the trout and the salmon. Right. And he's the other way. He thinks bass are so cool, if you can believe that. Right. And so he's a pro bass fisherman now. And so when I went fishing with him, I was like, man, let's catch some big rainbows and browns and stuff. And we did, together on a fly rod. And he was like, yeah, you would do well with that in Alaska. And I asked him, I said, I've been in Alaska, walked up to a stream. A guy there didn't know really, but I was walking up to it, and occasionally there were salmon coming through. And he said, man, they're really not running. I'm like, yeah, that's okay. I'm just going to catch some rainbows. There's got to be something in here, some Dolly Varden or something, which is a char. And I almost like them better just because they're rarer. I don't get to catch char that often other than the brooks. Right. Yeah, so they taste the same though. And he was like, oh, you won't catch anything. I don't think there's even any in here. And I'm like, well, what are those? You can see them. And he's like, I don't think those are fish. They're like that big. And I'm like, dude, down where I'm from, right, I'd catch those all day. And he's like, I'm not sure. Those are probably too small to eat, because in Alaska, if it's smaller than that, you can't eat it. And I mean, I love making meals out of pan-sized trout. Right. So I caught, most were probably between 12 or 14 inches, and he watched me. He's like, I'll be darned, I've never seen someone catch a trout in that river. I don't know if I've ever heard of that. His wife comes walking up with the dog, and I guess she came from a family that did that. Have you ever seen anybody catching trout in here? And she goes, no. Right. I don't think, I didn't even know we really had any in there. Wow. In this part of the country. They're everywhere.
What are you conditioned
But for them, it's just, right, you want to go fishing? Well, it's salmon. That's it. Right. And I mean, the real fishermen, they're into the lake trout and all that. But down here, we're just like, ooh, go northern pike fishing, and up there, right, they're like, they're poisonous. You can't eat them. That's a trash fish.
Have you seen
them?
It's like,
have you ever eaten? They're delicious.
They are.
And it's just, it's so funny. But then when you get there, I see why they're that way. Oh yeah. It's foolish. And I feel silly because I'm just like, you people, I would be fishing my butt off. But when you're sitting there and a 10-pound salmon's jumping, right, and you're just trying to get that line, oh my goodness, I think I almost got him, because sometimes it'll hit and slide right over their back, and just if I go close, a little slower, it'll sink down and it'll get right in his mouth. And you're sitting there looking at him, and you're just flipping that fly, and then you flip it and you got a rainbow trout, that's 20 inches that nails it, and you're just like, dadgummit, get off my line, I'm trying to catch this salmon. Right. And you're just like, if I caught that in a little mountain stream in the lower 48, I'd talk about it for a week, because right, I mean, that's a trick. Right. To catch a 20-inch rainbow in a little, yep, stream. They're kind of rare. Up right there, it's just every other one's, yeah, 18 to 20 to 30 inches. Right. You can catch a 30-inch rainbow, and they actually kind of protect the trout up there too. So it's just very. I see why they're that way. I'm still not exactly that way. If you are a fisherman, down here, so back to Mike, he was saying, well, in Alaska, it's the salmon, and a lot of the ideology focuses around the silver and the king, and there's just this stuff you use. So fly fishing in Alaska is really more salmon oriented and even steelhead oriented. And so, to come into a small brook and catch a dozen char, brook trout, Dolly Varden, up there, the Arctic char, or to catch, even just rainbows, no one does that. I mean, if they do, I've never met them. So the finesse of the fly fishing, I mean, just splitting it down to the nth degree to effectively catch, browns and rainbows, and knowing where they're at in the river and how to read the river to know where the fish are. It's just all about salmon up there. So if you come in with a fly rod, pick a river, and there you go. And right, and you're just reeling them in hand over fist. And at least some of the people that I've been around in Alaska were just like, I'm not, I'm not a pro, so I'm not an incredible fly fisherman, but I'm pretty good. I'm as good as I think I can be. I'll put it that way, for as often as I get to do it, and I'm happy at least that I can accomplish what I can with it down here.
Right.
But up there, it's just hand over fist, and they're just like, "How are you doing that? What are you catching those on?" Then when you show them, they're like, "That? You're catching fish on that?" And you're like, "Well, yeah, it's fly fishing." "That's not fly fishing. That's like a little bitty bug." And you're like, "Well, what do you think fly fishing is?"
Right.
"Well, man, that's not a fly. I mean, look here. See this big pink? That's a fly. There's a fly. That's fly fishing." And you're like, "Well, that's a salmon flesh fly. Yeah,
Right.
yeah, sure, it's a fly, but you're never going to catch a trout on that, unless it's in a river where salmon are, and they know, oh, that's probably a running piece of salmon." So it's just very different. So it was neat, that you can catch them there. It's a lot harder to do that. Like I'm more of a Rocky Mountain fly fisherman, and if I was ever in the East, I know good and well I'd have a real hard time catching trout because they are very different, and it's a little bit slightly different approach, and it'd take me a while to get into it. I can go anywhere in the Rockies and boom, boom, boom.
Right.
But then you get out of the Rockies and you're just like, man, what is it? The bugs are slightly different, the pattern's different, the rivers are very different for one thing. They're not as fast, the presentation's different. But in Alaska, it all works.
Right.
So, and that was his last point was this. He said, well, to be honest, man, in Alaska, you really don't have to be a good fisherman. Just throw it in the water. You'll catch them. So you just got to get there. And so that was, the amazing thing is you don't really have to bring a lot of skill to the table. If you can get there, you'll catch them.
If you can get there.
A lot of them.
Right. What did you have to do to build an aircraft that enabled you to get to those kind of remote sites where we were?
Well, I guess, especially now that I've built a couple of them, probably the biggest thing is, I think a better way to I guess this is the way I'd kind of answer that. It's not necessarily any one specific thing. It is, for instance, like if you take IFR, for example, when people down here, it's a very different approach to IFR than up there, because up there they don't have a choice, just like the guy we stayed with. 100 hours a year in IMC in a cub every year, average. That's what he said.
Right.
I'm going to spend in my little cub, I'm going to fly IFR, I'll be in IMC 100 hours every year. And down here, they're like, in a single engine? Well, just take a few minutes and look at how they maintain their aircraft up there. Because per capita, they don't have the aircraft issues that we do. Just look at the warbirds that are still in use, hauling fuel on C-47s.
Right.
And down here we're like, that's a relic. You can fly that thing, yeah, and it's never crashed, and that thing's never had an accident, and it flies 50 hours a week. 50 hours a week, and that thing was built in 37, 38, 39. And it's flying 50 hours a week up there. And, there's guys that have making a living rebuilding original engines, and down here it's just like, I didn't know anybody could do that. Maintenance up there is so important because that's your life.
Right.
And it's your life down here too, but just there's a complacency that slips in. So like, let's say, and you hear it all the time, especially on the internet and in conversations, I know you were there, listening to that one dad, and with his son, and he just made the statement, I'm never, and he, well, do you have dual ignition? Oh yeah. Well, yeah, I guess I don't need that because I'm never ever gonna fly this thing in IMC. I would never do that. Okay, fine, well and good. But if you pay attention to what a lot of guys are saying, when you begin to ask them, hey man, I mean that's a pretty wide EGT spread. You want to do something about that? Yeah, but man, I never fly this thing in IMC, so I mean I would, but like if I was going to fly this in IMC, oh yeah, I would totally I would totally do something different. I would totally add that. I would change that.
In Alaska, you don't have any choice.
Right,
If you
but if you listen to what they're saying, I don't maintain my aircraft optimally because that's their excuse. It's a single engine, and I'm never going to fly an IMC, so I'm not really going to take care of it to that level.
Right.
Well, up there they do because you can't operate a twin in and out of those places.
Right.
And a twin wouldn't. A twin's not going to help you in any of those situations.
Right.
They have a higher fatality rate for a reason. So you lost one engine, great, but you're still
Can you fly it?
going to have a really hard time flying this sucker, and you're not going to make your destination. So pick your landing spot.
Right.
You're going down,
Put it down.
just not as hard.
Yeah.
And so when you are going down, a little light Cub without an engine has a higher survivability rate, big time, than coming down in a Baron. So the twin engine didn't necessarily help you so much up there, and that's why you see twins in such a limited capacity in Alaska. It's just single engine, single engine, single engine, single engine.
It is.
That's one of the reasons it's been explained to me. So it's about how you maintain it when you're going to operate in remote areas.
Right.
Like you go through that thing and you make it perfect.
Right.
And if you're building one, especially the second time, people are like, you should never fly that over. Fine. But you're building an airplane anyways, or you're an AMP. I promise you, you will build that thing differently.
Right.
If you know that you're flying, you're going to cross 400 miles of ocean.
Yep.
You build them differently. I do.
Right.
And when it doesn't matter if you're never going to do that. Whatever you would do to build it that way, just do it that way. But it's like, well, I mean, if this was going to be like, if someone put a gun to my head and they're like, you're going to fly this thing over the ocean at night, well, then I would do X, X, Y, and Z. Yeah, then just do it.
Right.
Because, and so building an airplane for use in remote areas, most of it is how, it's how it's maintained in your design, and then like that engine thing, our EGT spreads are 5 degrees maybe, 10 at the outside. And unless it's at a certain power band, it'll never be, every EGT will be within 5 degrees. Every cylinder head is going to be within 5 degrees of each other. And, that engine is so balanced. Now, you can't do that in general aviation and, with air-cooled engines and all that. Yeah, I get it. But, when you can control those cylinders individually and get them optimally trimmed, so instead of just trimming out the whole intake system and the whole fuel system, and it is what it is, because even with a Venturi, each cylinder takes, but depending on how it comes in and which power setting you're on, it just takes a little bit of cylinder. So when you can trim out each and lean each cylinder with its own custom setting across all power bands. I mean, that engine, not only is it not working hard, everything is so well balanced. Right. It's way, way smoother. And, and you maintain over that life, and spark plugs and all that. So having, the ability to do, build an airplane that you can do in-field diagnostics.
Right.
So you know what's wrong.
Right. And you can change it. And
far more importantly than that, what I would say is more important even than making it that way is the fact that you can see it coming. There are very few, I can't think of one, but some smart aleck on the internet would probably come up with one. There's just very few engine problems that you don't actually see coming about 25 to 50 hours away. So there are almost no engine problems that come out of nowhere.
Right.
And the most egregious ones that I've ever heard of or ever read about, I'm sure there was a tell a long time ago, because this guy wasn't the guy maintaining the aircraft, or he didn't pay attention, and he didn't really know where that EGT should be. He didn't know where that CHT should be.
Right.
When there was a tell 25 minutes before it, 30 minutes before it, almost every time. Yeah, I mean, you just read the NTSB reports, you see it every time. Well, we did notice that we kind of lost some oil pressure, and we've never seen it that low, but, it seemed to settle out, so we continued on. There was your tail, bro.
Right.
That's the turnaround and get down. And unfortunately, that may be all most GA, engines are going to give you.
Right.
If you can't see, a lot of times you get one EGT. You have no clue what the other ones are doing. Cessnas are famous for that. Sometimes it's a collective. Here's your collective exhaust gas temperature out of all 6 cylinders. So it's very good, like with the JPI system. I mean, when those first came out, because you could go in and I can see the EGT in all 6 cylinders.
Right.
You can get one CHT. Well, here's the hottest cylinder, so we'll put a temp probe on that, and that's all you got. I've seen that in Cessnas a lot too. So you really can't see what's going on. Yeah, don't take that thing into remote areas.
Right.
Just do not do it.
Yep.
You want to see everything that's going on, and then every single time, just like when we're in those super remote areas or going over those glaciers, your engine page is up, and that's what you're looking at. And it helps, because you can set, Garmin's going to alarm you, so you don't have to necessarily watch it like a hawk, but you know what it should be. It knows what it should be. When it knows it's not normal, it tells you, this is kind of not normal. Number 4 is getting a little hot,
Right.
or number 4 is getting a little cold. Might have a spark plug closing up or something. And so, which with avgas is what you worry about.
Right.
And so with its maintenance, and then your engine, in the ability to do in-field maintenance on that aircraft, I would suggest 2 or 3 ways to start it. We always had 3.
Right.
We had jumpers, we had solar power, we could have lost our battery, we could have replaced our battery. Right. We had 2 starter banks, so you have 2 independent sources of power to power a starter. Right. Now that comes down to the building. So there's some just common sense stuff like that, but at the end of the day, it's almost every single nut and bolt. You build it like you're going to fly this thing over the ocean, and there will be no place to land, and it can't quit. And when you do it like that, when that's your outlook, you'll build them differently, and you'll maintain them differently. Right. And that's the way they do it in Alaska, because they have to. Because down here, it's just like, if I told you this year, I'm sorry, this is where you live in Port Allsworth, you will be an IMC if you want to go get groceries. Your wife's going to be an IMC. What do you say? His wife loads up
206
every 2 weeks and goes, because they're running an operation, loads up in the 206, flies IMC to Anchorage and gets 1,000 pounds of groceries every 2 weeks. Loads it up 1,000 pounds. Chicken feed, fuel.
Right.
They got to bring the fuel back.
Right.
Brings in her fuel, so every time she brings back more fuel than she took.
That was amazing.
Okay.
And also seeing...
So, his wife's flying IMC,
right.
And down here, a pilot would just turn white.
Right.
Flying a Cessna and a Cub in IMC, and it's like, yeah, my wife probably puts more hours in IFR than I do, but we have to get groceries. Right. And it just changes your outlook. Then you pay attention, of course, this guy's an AMP and he's an IA, and you're just like, this would be the guy to listen to on how do you maintain an aircraft. Right. Because his accident record is incredible.
Right. Well, and plus, when you saw his home that was built by him.
Yeah, everything's flown in.
He flew everything in and then built it. You can't get there, Port Ellsworth, anyway, but flying. There's no, roads.
Yeah.
There isn't a port. You got to fly it. So it's just such a part of their life. And if you don't learn from people like that, and you obviously were, and had known him from before, how invaluable. Yeah. It's the guy's livelihood, and he's one of the best in Alaska.
Yeah, he's probably the best one I've ever met.
Right.
I'd put him up against anybody in the world.
Right. Right.
If you look at his experience. I'm never even going to say how many hours he has. No one will believe it.
Right.
But when you look at where he lives.
Kids, the whole family, they're all in, and they understand the importance. What's that?
Yeah, they all fly.
Right.
They all,
and they can all work on planes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's
livelihood.
And so operating or building an aircraft for use in remote areas. I guess it shouldn't be different, but it in a way it is very different. And I guess down here, yeah, there's no reason to have. I guess we really had 4 different ways both trips to start that engine.
N+3.
You know, there's no reason to have that. You know,
Yeah.
but down here, you know, what if your battery goes bad? Of course, since it's experimental, you can use the best cutting edge technology in batteries. They don't go bad. I mean, they just don't go bad. But even if it did, great, you got another one. Right. And you have what if you can't charge it? You know, you lost your alternator. Well, you got another alternator. Well, you know, then the naysayers, well, what if you lost both alternators? Well, you got an auxiliary and it's solar powered.
Right.
And if the sun's out, you're fine. If the sun's not out, then you're probably going to need to land in about 2 hours.
Right.
That is a long time.
Right. Well, and
You
to
know,
start to do
so
the probability
doing-
analysis that happens.
Yeah, well,
at
and
some
those
point,
guys,
risk and
you know,
return
it
matters.
becomes a game for them.
does.
You know, once
NASA.
they realize they didn't get you on that one,
Right.
then they come up. Well, then what if you lost all 3 of your batteries and Russia launched a nuke and an EMP goes off? And I'm like,
Right.
well, I'm guessing when the nuke goes
the
off
least of your
in my
problems.
vicinity, I'm coming out of the sky because of physics. I'm thinking my lack of electrical power will be the least of my worries.
Exactly.
Oh, well, yeah, I guess that. But see, there you go. So that's probably why because that could happen. You probably shouldn't do that. I mean, it sounds ludicrous, but
Right.
I mean, I've had those conversations. So, you know, and a lot of it, you know, is probably just, I don't know if it's jealousy or what, but or it's just pride things like, you know, you might not have thought about this. What are you going to do when you get out there and this happens?
Right.
Well, I have this, so I'm going to do that. Oh, well, I didn't know you could do that. Can you do that? Well, sure you can do it. Lots of planes do that. Oh, well, then what if something happened to that? Well, then I'd have to pull up the floorboard and I'd pull this out and then I'd hook this up. Well, what if like you were hurt? Like, what if your arm was broken and then you couldn't get the screws out of the floorboard to get to that? Oh, you mean after these 2 fail and all that? Yeah.
Right.
I guess I'd have my friend do it.
Right.
Well, what if he got eaten by a bear? Then what are you going to do? I mean, it's just a game for them because then they realize, oh, he's thought this through more than I have, and they're embarrassed. I don't know what it is.
Right.
But, you know, it's just that.
Right.
But it you know, it happens a lot. And so, you know, operating in remote areas, I think, is a lot like flying in IMC and IFR. And so the beauty is they're pretty simpatico. You don't want that thing quitting
Nope.
when you're in IFR. I don't care where you're at. You don't have to be in Alaska. You don't want it quitting. Well, when you're in Alaska, you don't want it quitting. So VFR, IFR, yeah, it doesn't really matter. You basically operate it and maintain it like an IFR plane. Like last year, I had 30 hours in IMC of actual IMC.
Right.
So I mean, I was flying IFR a lot, and and you can blame a lot of that on Alaska because welcome to Alaska. You're not
Right.
going to go anywhere,
Right.
and you know that's a lot of times just where they stick you, and that synthetic vision though gives you a great deal of confidence because you know right where you're gonna go because you can see it all.
Right.
There's the road, there's the airport. I'm within gliding distance, so I'll just do what they tell me to. But they put you in a holding pattern, and you'll rack up the IMC hours quick. And so it's not just thinking through of all these contingencies. You do need to be, and we'll talk more about that later, a little bit more scientific about it because a lot of times in guys, when they get focusing on redundancy, a lot of times on any aircraft, you go in and say, okay, even on an electrical system, I'm going to do N+1. Okay, well, problem is, what took out number 1? Is this actually redundant? Why wouldn't this take out? So you see all the time guides in their aircraft, and they'll have, 2 lanes, but they're going to the same source. So it's like, okay, if you lose this source, you have nothing. And this source derives its power from this. So it's the weakest link. So you can have N+2 out here on your electrical system.
You'll never get there.
But if you have one alternator, for instance, you've gained something off the battery, okay? But, it's one thing.
Right.
You want to make it to where no one thing would as few number 1 things would bring you down as
Weakest
possible.
link.
And so technology's changed a lot in the IFR stuff. when you build an airplane for use in remote areas, that same, just don't, I guess don't always go with the party line.
Right.
Think about it. And you draw it out on paper, and a lot of times you'll see, or especially like in CAD on CNC, or like CNC software for like CAD, and you put it in CAD, and then you look at, well, that's a brilliant idea, but I think I'm worse off for it because this system
Right.
has a much higher probability of failure,
Right.
you know, than what I had. So you want two different power sources, you know, you hook up two different power sources to a fuel pump. And you're like, well, great, this is awesome. That way, if this one shorts out, yeah, well, they're both hooked up, dum-dum. So unless there's a diode on that thing, you know, in fact, on both of them, and then it's got to be a right kind of diode because, and how long is it going to last? How long is it going to hold back that current? I mean, that fuel pump could, you know, boost could be pulling 5 amps. So you got two wires coming into a fuel pump, and you're like, that way if one shorts out, the only way that works is if you can shut the source off for that short, because if that thing shorts out, it's going to pull power here from your secondary fuel source as soon as you go to it.
Right.
You know, and it's just stuff like that where you see that a lot, and so it's a feel good. It's just like, yeah, but now I got two sources of power,
Right.
you know, for each individual thing. Well, now you've doubled, you know, if you were doing a bad job on your chafe protection,
Right.
and zipping stuff down, all you've accomplished is doubling your chances of having a short with your two wires instead of the one wire.
Right.
And so, you know, that's probably, there's that, but it's really about maintaining it and doing it right, because, you know, you would be far better off than doing that. I mean, ultimately, two power sources, two wires,
Right.
good chafe. You know, it's not going to chafe.
Right.
It's not going to happen. Do it that way. Yeah, that's ideal. But a lot of times guys are just like, oh, you only got one source? Well, I got two. Do you really though?
Right.
You know? So yeah, you want two, but make sure you're not making the problem worse.
Right. Right. Well, there's a theme there then. I mean, it's do your homework and be able to search out and find the truth. And don't just accept anybody's opinion on it. I mean, use common sense to test the hypothesis
And-
that you should do it that way, because it may be,
Yeah.
it's almost
and
like
maybe
a
it's
wife
maybe it's
sale.
because, you know, I fly it and
Right.
it's my life. So
Exactly.
oh, that's the way to do it, huh? Yeah. Okay. Well, before I put my little life on your idea,
Right.
we're gonna prove that thing out.
Right.
You know, yeah, it's and there's a lot of stuff like that. I mean, especially in the firearms business.
Right.
Oh my goodness, you know, where it'd just be this whiz bang, theoretically rock solid firearm, you know, that somebody's come up with and designed. Like, okay, so what happens when somebody does this? You know, and everybody's just looking around like blink, blink, and it's just like, gosh, you know, we didn't think of that. And it's like, yeah, well, I mean, this would be, now it's worse. Now it's
Right.
more dangerous than the original design. That was a heck of a lot safer. Yeah, you know, so you got to be careful that
Right.
you can't just, oh, I'm going to improve that. Yeah, we'll just double it. We'll make it twice as thick.
Right.
You know, light is strong when you're dealing with inertia.
Right.
Man, we doubled the mass of this thing and this scope just flew apart. Yeah, that's the way, you know, inertia works.
Right.
You put twice the effort on that glass and on those mounts because your scope is twice as heavy. Your scope would literally be twice as strong if it was half the weight, because it gets half the inertia. Yeah, I guess so. I guess we just thought it would be good to beef that sucker up.
Right.
And it's the same way in aircraft. Now we'll just beef that thing up. Are you making it stronger by doing that? I mean,
Right.
physics,
Right.
you know, and software's changed a lot of that. That makes it a lot easier.
Right. But it's the combination of when emotion and feelings get involved and you lose sight of, no, let's really figure out the truth. Let's test that hypothesis. Let's use the scientific method. And it's applicable in all sorts of things. I mean, it really, It really is. But at some point, you've got to get to the crux of what is truth. And most people don't want to do that. They want to read a firearms magazine, or they want to read a aviation. Well, he said so right there. He said that's what you should do.
I used to always say,
Not that I know of.
well, when they come into the shop, sometimes and like I said, it's kind of like a game, but you just start to kind of point out, man, have you thought about this? It's like, well, I don't have to, because this guy, he's the safety expert, and this is what he said, and I'm like, okay, and so he comes back, and I don't want to mention the name or the situation. And so I said, well, I guess you can get on the internet and tell all those commandos they were wrong now, but you paid for it.
Right.
What did you gain? No, this guy on the internet, he's the safety expert, and that's what everyone else says to do, and I'm just like, I don't care.
Right.
What everyone else says. If they won't show the reasoning behind it, and a lot of times they don't, and no one asks, and it's just like, dude, it's your money. In this case, was really all it was. So, okay, well, he's the expert. You should call the expert. Well, you're not going to do that. You can't do that. So you lost. So if that guy just put a little bit of thought, just be open-minded.
Right.
Just don't swallow the pill whole. Like the
Test it.
lemmings. If that's really that important to you, then nobody really. What's it? Tom was always saying, the old flight instructor. No one likes my life as much as I do, so I will look my plane over. I don't care what the A&P says.
Absolutely.
And I don't know that I saved my life, but I saved a plane from burning down one time as a student pilot. And I always remembered that. I was just taught that way anyways. And gosh, you just, knowing what I knew about planes anyway, you look at some plane and you're just like, oh my goodness, I've got to fly that.
Right.
Take the cowling off, and the guy comes out and he goes, what are you taking the cowling off for? I'm like, I'm doing a pre-flight. Well, yeah, but that's not on the checklist. And I'm like, well, yeah, but it's on my checklist.
All right.
Well, you just don't need to be doing that. And I said,
do if you put it back on, right?
Well, there was
the
Pipers, it was a Piper, and it had a copper fuel line. It was actually a prime line, and it was snapped in half.
Putting fuel on the worm engine?
Oh, yeah.
We're fixing to?
Fire for sure. And so it was a primer line. And so, and I should point out, I'd come up because the cowling's off for like 15 minutes. And I was actually trying to call a guy and figure out, you got a fuel line that's off here. So I sent him a text, and he goes, no, that's not possible. The A&P just went through this. Well, I'm sure it was an accident, but someone must have banged it. They snapped this thing. Or it didn't, it had, he had too much hanging out and didn't have a bend in it, and it flopped back and forth. It's copper and terrible.
Right.
So it worked hard and then probably just snapped off. But I'll guarantee it did it after it was shut down, or while it was shut down, or something, because I'd like to think I would have smelled it.
Right.
And that was probably the Lord. I was just a student pilot, but I always took the cowling off. Right. And so I think he was just so embarrassed. But when he saw the fuel line, then I said, well, hold on. This is what I was texting Josh about. Look at this. And he turned white as a sheet. Because he knew what was fixing to happen. Because, I'm supposed to start the engine. I'd have been out there, and just his plane would have hopefully turned into a fireball while I'm sitting there warming the engine up. Hopefully that's what would have happened, rather than when I was in the air.
Go kaboom.
And so I always remember that about what Tom said. And he was like, yeah, those A&Ps, they don't love my life as much as I do. So
that's exactly right.
And if you're an A&P, pretend you're going to fly this thing. So I think that helps, because, I'm taking this thing into remote wilderness, and when you're going to do that, you will build them differently.
Right. And, I always make that phrase. It's not that I'm an expert, but I have been in Wichita, Kansas a fair amount. And I've been in a certain GA plane company because a friend of mine was the senior VP of engineering. And just to go out to the assembly line. And I could relate because my first job out of school was
You don't want to see the sausage made, I'm sure.
Ford Motor Company.
Yeah.
I mean, I saw, cars coming off with paint blemishes on them that big on a siren, and it somehow was not caught in quality control. You got to be kidding me. I mean, it's like tracking a polar bear, in the snow,
Bleeding
a
in the
bleeding
snow.
polar bear. That's exactly right. You didn't have to be real good at quality control of that one's got to go back through the paint booth, boys. But, you really think that guy, I've said it before, coming off a 3-day drunk in Wichita, slapping together, that GA airplane, you think he cares one whit about your life? You got a hangover. He just wants to go home. You probably shouldn't come to work in that condition. So of course, it's all about, taking care of your stuff, thinking, being proactive, to look for problems, fix problems, tell
you
people
can
about
you can
problems.
find an excuse, but you're the one that's going to die, or not die, get stuck, or be inconvenienced, or
Right.
whatever. You are. So you
Right.
can say, well, I don't have to because of this guy, but
Right,
man, I would encourage everyone
right,
that
Right.
if just and it's common sense, but you either get with somebody you really trust or don't assume.
right.
And just learn the ins. I mean, you can learn in a few hours how to spot something wrong on your airplane.
Right,
But I mean, that obviously isn't enough for me. I mean, I wanted to know everything.
Right.
But even that could make a difference to where you're not just having to take someone's word. I mean,
No question.
I mean, we all hear the stories,
Right.
Take your oil in to get changed, the safety wire off, and then all of a sudden up, you lose your, and that's what caught this guy.
Right.
Yeah, we kind of lost the oil pressure. Well, what was it? Well, yeah, we left the oil plug. It didn't get safety wired, and I guess it backed out, and so it squirted out all its oil, and and that was the tell. And the engine went 25 minutes without oil, and then it
Right.
quit. So
Called
there's
lubrication for a
yeah.
reason.
So that's okay. You had 25 minutes to get down, really.
Right.
And you can read those reports all the time. And I mean, I've just got story after story like that. And that will make you maintain a plane differently too.
Right, right. But there is a problem-setting mindset. Anytime you're trying to figure out the truth and figure out
Yeah,
what's
definitely needs to be your approach. Definitely in the wilderness.
right,
What are you going to do when, that's why you can't be experienced. I mean, if you love that stuff, then just get out and do it because, reading about it and
Build
of
experience.
course the magazine writers are the worst. But, if you're going to take their word for it, well, that's on you, pal.
Right.
I at one point was getting a degree in wildlife biology, and you talk about losing your faith in our education system. Oh my goodness. But it's so funny because they would take wildlife like it's a machine. I mean, they don't realize it, but this is what they're doing. Now, this is what a grizzly bear does, period. That's a wild animal. He'll do whatever the heck he wants
He
to.
will.
These are what coyotes do. They mate for life. Oh, yeah?
right.
Well, I've got trapping records and some video that would prove otherwise, because you want to know how I catch a bunch of them? I mean, so they would just try and cram wildlife into this mold or these laws, because and that's why biologists, a lot of times, to people that have spent any time out in nature, they start to sound like, unfortunately, a lot of them sound like a bunch of idiots.
Right.
Because you're just like, that's true most of the time,
Right.
but it's
Doesn't
not a
always work that way.
scientific law.
Right.
Quail do this all the time. No, they don't.
Right.
I read the book. Well, when you're in, the wilderness and someone tells you, yeah, you don't have to worry about that. You can legally fish that stream. How many times you hear that story? Then game warden comes along. Well, no, this is definitely, but my friend, and he works for you guys, and he said this was legal. Oh, okay. Well, you
Good
should
for
go
him.
tell him he's wrong. In the meantime,
Right,
here's
pay
your
the
court
ticket.
date. Here's your ticket, So, you're going to be always met in probably in anything to do with the outdoors.
Right.
you know, shooting especially, but definitely in aviation. Yeah, if you're looking for an excuse, you'll find one. Well, yeah, I mean, I crashed and died, but he said my airplane was okay. And
Right. I feel better
okay,
about myself.
yeah, but at least he
You
told me it
shouldn't.
was so. It wasn't my fault because, well, you're right. It wasn't your fault, but you're still dead,
Right.
or you're still stuck, or you know, you still lost an airplane.
Right.
So
Right.
pat yourself on the back.
Right.
It wasn't your fault, but you could have stopped it.
Right. Right.
And that's what I love about being in the wilderness is just that, man, it's all on you.
It is.
And that's why people don't like it. And I think that's partly why I think that's partly why some people don't like you being in the wilderness.
Yeah.
Because they're like,
'Cause
oh, I
they choose
wouldn't
not to.
do that. I couldn't do that.
Right.
You shouldn't do that either.
Right.
It's especially comical to me when you hear that argument coming, though, from Christians.
Right.
Because it's just like, boy, do you give the Lord no credit?
Right. Right.
I mean,
Well, that to me is the perfect example. You know, I mean, one, look at what our public school system does, and then analyze certain theories that have been put into textbooks for 100 years, still are. It's insanity. The probability that you could create one cell that way and understand amino acids and understand peptides and understand they're left-handed and they're right-handed and the average one is 150, but some are 30,000. But oh yeah, we all came
Random
from
chance.
that. Right, random. It's if you have long enough. No, let me explain math to you. If something
yeah,
is impossible,
I wish that
it's
theory would
impossible over
work for
billions of
me,
years.
you know, on these guns and these airplanes.
Right,
'Cause
that they could just
well, it'd be a
something
whole
came
lot
from
better
nothing.
if they would not only just kind of eventually build themselves, but if they just stay that way.
Right,
Because
right.
that degradation and that rust on that gun
Right.
barrel.
And that nasty
that
second
black
law
powder.
of thermodynamics. I mean, I have a closet and a hunting closet, and I notice that it tends to disorder, not to order. So if you think, you can, something goes into a junkyard and comes out a perfect 747 on the other side, you're just out of your mind.
Yeah.
You don't want to know the truth.
Yeah.
It makes me feel warmer and more comfortable that I don't have to submit to a God who has put all this in place, all of it. You can choose to accept it or not. It's not going to change anything.
Yeah.
I know.
Yeah.
I mean, no,
So, yes, and that is what I love about the wilderness.
Absolutely.
Is just that
It's different
well,
every
it's all on
stinking
you,
time.
and that was part of. I mean,
Yeah.
if you like freedom, and I do, that's what that means.
Right.
It takes a lot of personal responsibility, and
question.
that young guy that works for you. He's always asking me why. Why does it always seem to work out for you? And my answer is always, well, number one, I'd say God, but secondly, I don't give it any choice.
Right.
Why do you want to let it screw up? Because it's gonna want to. You think that screw is gonna want to run straight?
Keep it from disorder.
Don't give it a choice.
Right.
Well, your screws just run so straight. Make them.
Right. Right.
They're not gonna want to run straight by themselves.
Right.
Just try it. Just try and first time in your life, go grab a hammer and a nail, drive that sucker in straight.
Right.
It will not want to go. It
Right.
will want to go any way but the way it's supposed to. And you got to make it. You got to hit it
figure out
just
the
right.
technique that-
Glancing blow.
that makes
This
it
way,
work.
that way, and get it in there.
Yep.
And it's the same way, with airplanes, the same way in the wilderness.
It
Yeah, that
is.
could happen. So make sure that it doesn't.
Right.
And then when it does, you did everything you could have, and you won't be the guy saying, "Well, he said it would be okay."
Right.
Then it does change when you're like, I did everything I could have.
Right.
And you just don't have the regrets.
Right, right. And you take the responsibility. I mean, it's when you're in the outdoors and doing other things, it's my responsibility, it ain't anybody else. And that's what we're always trying to teach, teenagers that,
Yeah.
as you grow in Christ,
hunting,
you learn to take responsibility for your own life.
Yeah. Well, hunting is the best way for that because, especially the biologists.
Nobody can do it for you.
If you come from that background and you have all these theories, then you figure out that's not the way it works.
Right.
And for you can read, right. and do all this stuff, but you go out there and it's just like, okay, well, they were wrong.
Right.
You your observation showed that you now see that this is what you should have done, but they didn't tell you that. Well, what are you going to do? Well, I shouldn't have listened to the magazine, or I shouldn't have listened to that guy.
No, you should take
Well,
responsibility for your own life.
He's not here. You're the one hunting. You do whatever you got to do
Right.
to be successful, or hang it up and quit.
Right.
That's hunting will teach, that definitely drove, because you don't have that excuse, like you hear in government all the time. Well, I took the people under me's word for it. Well, I did what my boss said. I mean, you can, and even when there's no one to blame, you can find one.
Right. Yeah. And give yourself the best chance for success. You knock a quail down, put your bird dog with the wind in his nose, and it gives him a better chance because he's got a lot better nose than I do. Or I can just blithely let him run around and see if he finds them. He may. He may not. I want to give him the best chance at success. That, to me, is the responsibility of a hunter. I've knocked that bird down. I'm going to find it, and I'm going to eat it.
Well, someday I'll tell you about a time I saw coyotes actively hunting quail, which I've never seen and I've never heard of it. It's one of the neatest things I ever saw.
Oh, I can only imagine.
And they hunt them about like a pointer.
Dude, it makes sense.
Into the wind, but they go crossways. So they don't work it like this too much.
Use that nose?
Yeah, but they just walk. Yeah, and he would stop every few feet and he would stick it up. And he'd just do this, 5 steps, stick it up. And they were both doing it together about 25 feet back.
Quail.
Then all of a sudden, he'd just stop, lock in, and head straight upwind, get up creep, covey rise. He'd jump for all he had. And the female is always in the rear, Female's always that one hanging back.
Right.
And his little girl back there, she'd run and she'd look like an NFL.
Jumping in the air?
No, well, sometimes they would.
Pass.
But I watched a female coyote one time and she was just hoofing it, and that quail would go this way and she could just about stay underneath that sucker. This was in a CRP field. And I don't know if she thought she could wear him out. I mean, she must have had a reason for doing that, because he's a good 20 feet in the air, but she stayed underneath him for a while. And he finally got the better of her, and then they, out of breath, both come back, kind of find their spot, and go on. And I watched them flush 2 coveys.
Wow.
And then a big buck mule deer, except he didn't flush. He come after him.
Did he really?
Oh, yes, he did.
Put the antlers to him? Good for him.
I mean, he couldn't even catch him, but I mean, he'd bluff charge them, and and that ended it. And it was gone.
Right.
But they just worked that wind.
Right. I mean,
So I guess they must have caught him, because they were doing it with purpose. So there's
only one thing that allows that coyote. Yeah, he's got some instinct, but he's got experience. He knows typically a quail, forget the wind and everything, doesn't really want to fly more than 200 feet because he ain't a duck. Yeah. He's a quail. He's more like, he didn't want to fly too far. And then they got to get the covey back together for protection and all that. So the coyote, though, with experience, figured that out.
Yeah. Well, that was about the end of his, though. His little girlfriend lived over it, but he stopped on a sandhill about 400 yards away.
Gave up his life.
I ended the quail hunt.
Couldn't happen to a nicer animal.
Fancy 6mm. So.
Yeah, that's a good way to, after watching an observation of wildlife, to end it for him.
Yeah.